The book really is about 13-year-old Catrin Grieve, who's sent away for the summer by a rather feckless and very beautiful mother down to stay with two great aunts in an isolated hotel on the Welsh coast. Originally it was a beautiful hotel where all the very wealthy people went to eat lobster and shrimps and all the rest of it. And when this poor child turns up, having been put on the train by a nun in London, arrives at this hotel to find that it's completely dilapidated, falling down. One of the two aunts is actually dead and only one is still alive, who's the eccentric and often foul-mouthed Grieve. And Catrin embarks on this really miserable summer where she's staying with an aunt who doesn't really want her to be there at all. And then she stumbles upon a book while she's staying there called Recipes for Cherubs. And this is a 200-year-old recipe book. And as she's kind of turning the pages, the most beautiful illustrations in there, and underneath each illustration is a different recipe. And this is very pointed really in which this is a child who struggles with food, not full-blown anorexic, but a child who has lost her appetite for life in more ways than one really. And as this book unfolds, she learns about three children in Italy in the 1750s and the remarkable painter Piero de Bardi. And there are lots of interlocking mysteries going through the book. The initial inspiration for this book came when I was right out on the Devon coast, and there's a tiny little a tiny little village on the rocks, and half of it was swept away in, I think, the 1850s or somewhere like that. Absolutely beautiful place. And above this funny little place is a hotel, and the stories ran that it was a fantastic place to go to. You know, they brought the fish in every day and sumptuous food and beautifully run. People came from miles around. And then there was a family tragedy, and one of the two sisters who ran it died. But the other one stayed in the house until I think the 1970s. And they used to say that she laid the tables up every night and checked the condiments and everything like that. And I found this like really sort of eerie. And it kept haunting me really about this woman in this hotel, kind of not really knowing whether she was living in the past or the present. So that was one idea in my head, and which kept coming back to me over and over again. And because I suppose I was working with anorexics and children with issues around food, I kept comparing the two, you know, this kind of wonderful abundance of food and why we eat, sharing food with friends and things like that. And then these children who just deny food and kind of starve themselves for whatever reasons. I suppose when I'm thinking about writing, I often think it's very similar to a painting, that you kind of pile on layer and layer really, and you know, texture, feel, smells, everything that goes into a novel really, just kind of floating around in my head. For much of my teaching life I've worked with disadvantaged children. In fact, I worked for 11 years in an adolescent psychiatric unit where we saw some very, very damaged children coming to work with us. And I do think that they arrive in my books really because I think I'm always trying to find a better outcome through fiction for, which sounds a bit daft, but for some of the children that I've worked with. And there's a terrible tenderness about youngsters in difficulty and the kind of stigmas around mental health and other issues. And I do think I try, not consciously always, but I do try to bring these children into my stories and try to remember childhood with all its terrors, all its smells, all its sort of magic and terror really. Life is never as intense again, I think, as when you're a child. I think it's a book about friendship, it's about abandonment, it's about hope, it's about joy, and it's about hunger, spiritually, emotionally, for the teenage girl, and the joys of food. I think it will appeal to children over 11 and adults everywhere who like a really good read and to be kept on their toes right until the end.